The customer would arrive in 2 hours, and no one could fix his truck until the unemployed mechanic, the midday sun beating down relentlessly on the Hernandez auto repair shop on the outskirts of Guadalajara. Roberto Hernandez, a 52-year-old man with hands weathered by decades of work, paced nervously among the dismantled vehicles that occupied every corner of his business. The smell of burnt oil and hot metal permeated the air, mingling with the sound of the tools his three mechanics were using incessantly. Don Roberto, I've already checked the entire electrical system and I can't find the problem, said Marcos, the most experienced mechanic in the shop, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a grease-stained rag. Roberto looked at the Kenworth T800 that dominated the main bay of the workshop. It was a heavy-duty truck, imposing even in its current immobile state. The indicator lights flashed erratically on the dashboard, and the engine emitted an irregular sound that none of his mechanics had been able to diagnose correctly. "We have less than 2 hours before Mr. Dominguez arrives," Roberto replied, his voice heavy with concern. "This man runs one of the largest transportation companies in Jalisco. If we fix his truck, we could get the maintenance contract for his entire fleet. That's more than 30 vehicles." The workshop's situation was critical. Over the past 6 months, competition from more modern workshops had drastically reduced his customer base. Roberto had had to lay off 2 mechanics and reduce the salaries of those who remained. His wife, Carmen, had gone back to work as a nurse on the night shift at the hospital to help with expenses. This contract with Dominguez Transportes was not just a business opportunity, it was the difference between keeping the workshop open or closing it down for good. "I've already tried changing the sensors, checking the harnesses. I even replaced the engine computer," Marcos continued, his frustration evident. "But the fault persists. It's as if the truck has a mind of its own." Roberto approached the vehicle and placed his hand on the hot hood. He remembered when he opened the workshop 25 years ago, full of dreams and determination. He had built his reputation on honesty and a job well done. Now all that seemed to be fading away. "Call all your contacts," Roberto ordered Marcos. "We need someone who knows these specific models. Offer whatever it takes." As Marcos began making calls, Roberto walked into a small office. The walls were decorated with photographs of satisfied customers, training course certificates, and an outdated calendar. He sat down at his metal desk and opened the drawer where he kept the shop's financial documents. The red numbers screamed at him from every page. His cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Carmen. "How's everything going? I'm praying for you." Roberto smiled sadly. His wife had always been his biggest supporter, even in the most difficult times. Don Roberto, the voice of Javier, the youngest mechanic, interrupted his thoughts. "Marco says he contacted all the specialized mechanics in the area. None of them can come in less than 4 hours. They're all busy." Roberto closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The clock on the wall read 12:30. Mr. Dominguez would arrive at 12 o'clock sharp. He was a punctual and demanding man, known for not giving second chances. "Is there anyone else?" Marcos said, entering the office with a doubtful expression. "Miguel Angel Ruiz worked for Dominguez Transportes 3 years ago. They say he's the best mechanic specializing in heavy truck electronic systems they've ever seen." But what?" Roberto asked, clinging to any hope. "He was fired a year ago. No one knows exactly why, but since then he hasn't been able to find stable work. He has a reputation for being difficult. Some say he's problematic." Roberto glanced at his watch again. He didn't have time to check references or conduct interviews. It was now or never. "Do you have his number?" "Yes, an old colleague gave it to me." Marco showed his phone with the contact. "Call him. Tell him we need his services urgently and that will pay well." Roberto stood up with renewed determination. Sometimes the desperate are the only ones willing to give other desperate people a chance. Marcos dialed the number while Roberto returned to the workshop bay. The Kenworth was still there, defiant, keeping its secrets. The other 2 mechanics had stopped working and watched in silence, aware that everyone's future depended on solving this mechanical puzzle. The phone rang 5 times before someone answered. Marcos quickly explained the situation, listened silently, and then hung up. "Well?" Roberto asked. "He's on his way. He says he'll be here in 20 minutes. Marcos paused. "He also said that if he can't fix it, no one can." Roberto nodded. Now all they could do was wait and hope that an unemployed mechanic, about whom they had only rumors and vague references, would be the answer to their prayers. Outside, the sun continued to shine brightly, indifferent to the human drama unfolding beneath its light. The future of the Hernandez auto repair shop and everyone who depended on it was about to be decided. Exactly 18 minutes later, a worn Honda motorcycle pulled up in front of the shop with a raspy sound that indicated it needed maintenance. A man of about 35 years of age, thin but athletic, with dark, slightly tousled hair and a three-day beard, got off the vehicle. He was wearing worn jeans and a gray t-shirt that had seen better days. The only thing that seemed to be in perfect condition was the professional tool bag he carried on his back. Roberto came out to greet him, studying the newcomer with the analytical gaze he had developed after decades of evaluating both vehicles and people. "Miguel Angel Ruiz," he said, extending his hand. "That's me. Can I call you Miguel?" the man replied, returning the greeting with a firm handshake. His voice was calm but confident. "Marcos explained to me on the phone that you have a Kenworth T800 with intermittent electrical faults that no one has been able to diagnose." "That's right. The customer will be here in less than an hour and a half." Roberto paused, deciding to be direct. "I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have time to check references or ask questions. I need to know if you can really help us." Miguel looked inside the workshop through the open door. His eyes lingered on the imposing truck that dominated the main bay. A small smile appeared on his face, as if he recognized an old acquaintance. "That specific model has a known problem with the engine control system," Miguel said, walking toward the vehicle without waiting for an invitation. "The manufacturer never issued an official recall, but those of us who work with large fleets know it well. The failure is intermittent because it depends on the temperature and electrical load of the system." Marcos, Javier, and the third mechanic, an older man named Ernesto, watched skeptically as Miguel approached the Kenworth. Roberto followed him, intrigued by the confidence this unemployed mechanic exuded. Miguel set his toolbox on the ground and opened the truck's hood with precise, experienced movements. He stood motionless for almost a minute, observing the engine as if he were reading an open book. "Have you checked the fan control module?" he asked without taking his eyes off the engine. "Yes, that was one of the first things we checked," Marcos replied, sounding slightly defensive. "I don't mean checking if it works. I mean checking if it's creating feedback in the system." Miguel pointed to a specific section of the engine compartment. "These models have a manufacturing defect in the insulation of the fan wiring. When the engine reaches a certain temperature, the defective insulation allows interference with other electrical systems. That's why the failures are intermittent and seem random." He took a digital diagnostic tool out of his briefcase, a piece of equipment that Roberto recognized as considerably more advanced than anything they had in the workshop. Miguel connected the device to the truck's diagnostic port and began navigating through menus with the speed of someone who had performed this operation thousands of times. "Here it is," he said after a few minutes, showing the screen to Roberto. "These error codes seem unrelated, but if you analyze them together and consider the timing pattern in which they appear, they all point to the same source: electrical interference from the fan circuit." Roberto looked at the screen. The data made sense, but it was an analysis that required a level of specialized knowledge that he did not possess. Marcos also approached, his expression changing from skepticism to genuine interest. "How long will it take to repair it?" Roberto asked. Miguel looked at his watch, then at the engine, doing mental calculations. "If I have the right materials, I can do it in 45 minutes. I need high-temperature insulated wire, specific connectors, and thermal seals. Ideally, I would replace the entire fan harness, but there's no time for that. I can do a temporary repair that will last long enough for the customer to test drive the truck and then schedule a complete repair later. Javier, go to the auto parts store on the corner and get everything Miguel needs," Roberto ordered, handing him cash. "Run, literally." As Javier rushed out of the workshop, Roberto turned to Miguel. "I need to ask you something, and I would appreciate an honest answer," Roberto said. "Why is a mechanic of your caliber unemployed?" Miguel was silent for a moment, his expression becoming more serious. He wiped his hands with a rag before answering. "A year ago, I was working as a maintenance manager for a medium-sized transportation company," Miguel began. His voice was controlled, but with a hint of bitterness. "The owner asked me to falsify maintenance reports to save money and avoid taking vehicles out of circulation. He wanted me to certify trucks as safe when they weren't. Roberto nodded slowly, understanding the seriousness of what Miguel was saying. I refused, Miguel continued. I explained that those trucks were dangerous, that they could cause accidents. He didn't care. He fired me on the spot, and to make sure I couldn't find work elsewhere, he spread the rumor that I was the one who falsified documents and that I had been fired for that reason. And you didn't sue him? Marcos asked. I tried, but he had more resources, better lawyers. In the end, my only option was to spend all my money on a lawsuit I would probably lose or accept the situation and move on. I chose the latter. Miguel looked directly at Roberto. I've survived on odd jobs ever since. Some days I repair motorcycles on the street. Other days I help out in small workshops for cash payments. It's not the life I imagined, but I wouldn't change my decision. I sleep peacefully, knowing that no driver died because of me. The workshop fell silent. Roberto looked at this man who had sacrificed his career to do the right thing. He recognized in Miguel something he himself valued: integrity. If you fix this truck and we get the contract, Roberto finally had said, I'll offer you a permanent job here. I can't pay you as much as you probably deserve, but it's honest and stable. Miguel looked at him with genuine surprise, as if he had forgotten how it felt to have someone trust him. No reference checks, no trial period. You've already checked the only reference that matters, Roberto replied. A man who chooses integrity over convenience is exactly the kind of mechanic I want in my shop. Javier came running back with a bag full of materials. Miguel took it, checked the contents, and nodded with satisfaction. Then I'd better get to work, Miguel said, taking out his tools. I have a job to earn. As Miguel began to dismantle the fan's electrical system with precise and confident movements, Roberto watched with a mixture of hope and anxiety. He had bet the future of his workshop on a complete stranger, but something inside him told him he had made the right decision. Sometimes, Roberto thought, the best opportunities come disguised as desperate risks. Miguel worked with such absolute concentration that he impressed even the experienced mechanics in the workshop. His hands moved with surgical precision, disconnecting harnesses, identifying damaged wires, and preparing the necessary repairs. There were no superfluous movements or hesitations. Every action had a clear purpose. Marcos, I need you to hold this section of the harness while I work on the other end, Miguel said without looking up. Ernesto, can you check the voltage at the main connection point? The multimeter is in my toolbox. The mechanics in the workshop, who had initially watched with skepticism, now followed Miguel's instructions without question. There was something about the way he worked that inspired confidence. It wasn't arrogance, it was pure competence, backed by years of experience. Roberto watched from the entrance to the bay, checking his watch every few minutes. It was 1:05. Less than an hour remained before Mr. Dominguez arrived. The midday heat was stifling, and the industrial fan in the workshop did little to alleviate the temperature. Small rivers of sweat ran down the foreheads of everyone present. The problem is more extensive than I initially thought, said Miguel, partially emerging from the engine compartment. His t-shirt was soaked with sweat and stained with grease. The faulty insulation is not only in the fan harness, it has spread to two other connected circuits. It's like an electrical cancer that is spread throughout the system. Can you fix it in time? Roberto asked, feeling his stomach tighten with anxiety. Miguel wiped the sweat from his forehead, leaving a dark grease stain. I can, but I need everyone to work with me. Marcos, you're going to replace this section of wiring. Ernesto, I need you to prepare the high-temperature sealed connectors. Javier, you will help me reassemble the system once we finish the main repairs. Do you trust us to do such critical parts? Asked Marcos, surprised that Miguel was delegating such important tasks. A good mechanic knows how to do the job. A great mechanic knows how to work as a team, Miguel replied, distributing tools and materials. Besides, I can see how well you've maintained this workshop. You know what you're doing. You just need specific guidance for this particular problem. Over the next 30 minutes, the workshop transformed into a perfectly synchronized orchestra. Miguel directed operations, explaining the purpose of each repair, and making sure everyone understood not only how, but also why. Roberto noticed something interesting. Miguel wasn't just fixing the truck. He was teaching. This type of failure is common in fleets operating in hot climates like ours, Miguel explained as he welded a connection. The key is to use materials with a higher than standard thermal rating. It costs a little more, but it prevents these headaches. Javier listened attentively, asking intelligent questions. Marcos and Ernesto, despite their greater experience, also absorbed the knowledge Miguel generously shared. At my last job, the boss hated it when we took the time to do things right, Javier commented as he prepared the connectors. He said that time was money and that quick repairs were more profitable. Time is money, Miguel replied without stopping his work. But reputation is wealth. Poorly done repairs give you one-time jobs. Well-done repairs give you customers for life. Which do you think is more profitable in the long run? Roberto smiled from his position. This Miguel Angel Ruiz was not only an exceptional mechanic, he was exactly the kind of mentor his team needed. For months, Roberto had watched his mechanics become demoralized by the decline in work. Now, in the midst of the biggest crisis the shop had ever faced, he saw them revitalized and learning. Okay, connection welded and sealed, Marcos announced, showing off his work. Miguel inspected the weld with a critical eye, then nodded approvingly. Excellent work. Better than many factory repairs I've seen, Miguel praised sincerely. Now, Ernesto, pass me those connectors. We're going to reassemble this before the sun goes down or before the customer arrives, whichever comes first. While they worked, Roberto walked to his office and called Carmen. How's everything going? His wife asked immediately. I think we found an angel disguised as an unemployed mechanic, Roberto replied, watching through the window as Miguel and his team worked in perfect harmony. I'll tell you all about it tonight, but Carmen, I think we're going to be okay. He heard his wife's sigh of relief on the other end of the line. I always knew you'd find a way, Carmen said. You're the most tenacious man I know. After hanging up, Roberto returned to the workshop bay. Miguel was in the final stages of the repair, reconnecting the last components with meticulous care. 1:35, Roberto announced, looking at his watch. 25 minutes until Dominguez arrives. Perfect. That gives us time to properly test the entire system, Miguel replied, closing the hood of the Kenworth. Javier, start the engine. The young mechanic climbed into the truck's cab and turned the key. The engine roared to life with a deep, steady sound. The dashboard lights illuminated normally without the erratic flickering that had plagued the vehicle for hours. Miguel reconnected his diagnostic tool and began checking the systems one by one. All parameters are within normal range, he announced after several minutes of exhaustive testing. There are no active or pending error codes. The system is stable. But Miguel didn't stop there. He spent the next 15 minutes having Javier rev the engine, activate different electrical systems, and simulate load conditions. He checked temperatures, voltages, and resistances at multiple points. Finally, he turned off the engine, waited 5 minutes, and started it up again. Perfect, Miguel said with satisfaction. The truck is ready. Roberto felt a huge wave of relief wash over him, but before he could express his gratitude, the sound of a vehicle parking outside caught his attention. He glanced at his watch, 1:58. Mr. Dominguez had arrived 2 minutes ahead of schedule. On your marks, gentlemen, Roberto said, straightening his work-stained shirt. It's time to see if all this effort was worth it. Miguel took a step back, letting Roberto take center stage, but Roberto stopped him with a gesture. You fixed the truck. You'll explain to the customer what was wrong and what you did to fix it, Roberto said firmly. In this workshop, we give credit where credit is due. A black Mercedes-Benz pulled into the workshop. A man of about 60 years of age, dressed in an impeccable suit despite the heat, stepped out of the vehicle. His movements were deliberate and his expression serious. This was Antonio Dominguez, a man whose reputation for exacting standards was as great as his transportation empire. The moment of truth had arrived. Antonio Dominguez walked toward the group of mechanics with measured steps, his expression inscrutable. Roberto stepped forward to greet him, extending his hand with a confidence he did not entirely feel. Mr. Dominguez, welcome. Your truck is ready, Roberto said, pointing to the Kenworth, which now gleamed under the workshop lights. Dominguez ignored the outstretched hand and walked directly to his vehicle, circling it slowly like a general inspecting his troops. His experienced eyes noticed every detail. The tools that were still organized near the truck, the fresh grease stains on the floor, the palpable tension in the air. What was the problem, he finally asked, without looking at anyone in particular. Roberto looked at Miguel, who stepped forward. Despite his disheveled and sweaty appearance, Miguel spoke in a clear professional voice. Electrical interference originating in the fan control system, Miguel explained. Faulty insulation in the main harness was causing feedback in other circuits, resulting in intermittent failures in multiple systems. It's a known manufacturing issue in this specific model, although the manufacturer never issued an official recall. Dominguez finally looked at Miguel, studying him intently, and Miguel replied, the solution was to replace the affected sections of the harness with high-temperature cable, install sealed connectors, and rearrange the routing of some cables to avoid critical hotspots. It's a temporary but solid repair. I recommend scheduling a complete replacement of the fan harness in the next 2 weeks for a permanent temporary solution. Dominguez's tone turned cold. I don't pay for temporary repairs, Mr. Dominguez. Roberto quickly intervened. The repair is fully functional and safe. Miguel calls it temporary because there is a more complete solution that requires specialized parts that would take a week to arrive. What he did today ensures that your truck will operate perfectly while we wait for those parts. In fact, the current repair will last for months without any problems. Miguel nodded. The truck is in perfect operating condition. It poses no safety or reliability risks. But as a professional, I always recommend the best possible solution, not just the one that works now. Something changed in Dominguez's expression. A spark of interest, perhaps respect, appeared in his eyes. Are you new here? He asked Miguel. I've brought vehicles to this shop before and never seen you. It's my first day, Miguel replied honestly. Mr. Hernandez hired me specifically for this job. I see. Dominguez walked over to the truck's cab. Then let's give it a real test. For the next 20 minutes, Antonio Dominguez subjected the Kenworth to a thorough inspection that would have made any mechanic nervous. He started and stopped the engine multiple times, activated every electrical system, checked every indicator on the dashboard, and even crawled under the truck to personally inspect the repairs. Miguel stayed close by, answering every technical question accurately and in detail. Roberto noticed how Dominguez, initially hostile, began to ask more complex and specific questions, testing Miguel's knowledge. To the businessman's surprise, Miguel answered each question not only correctly, but with a level of understanding that revealed years of practical experience. This model has a tendency to overheat on long routes through desert areas, Dominguez commented, clearly testing Miguel. Correct, Miguel replied without hesitation. The solution is to install an additional intercooler and modify the cooling system. I also recommend checking the thermostat calibration. I have worked with fleets that operate routes to Mexicali and Hermosillo, and these modifications reduce engine wear by 30%. Dominguez straightened up, wiping his hands with a handkerchief he took out of his pocket. Where did you work before? He asked, his tone now less interrogative and more curious. Miguel hesitated for a moment. Roberto tensed, worried that the truth might ruin everything, but Miguel decided to be honest. I was head of maintenance at Transporte Velázquez for 3 years, Miguel said. I was fired a year ago because I refused to certify vehicles as safe when they weren't. The owner preferred to save money rather than protect his drivers. The workshop fell completely silent. Roberto closed his eyes briefly, expecting the worst, but when he opened them, he saw something unexpected. Dominguez was smiling. It was a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it was there. I know Rafael Velázquez, Dominguez said. He's stingy and irresponsible. 6 months ago, one of his trucks had a serious accident because the brakes failed. A driver was killed. The investigation revealed that the truck had not been properly maintained in over a year. Miguel paled slightly. He didn't know that. He no longer worked there when it happened. But you tried to prevent exactly that kind of tragedy. Dominguez turned to Roberto. Mr. Hernandez, this young man has principles. That's rarer than it should be in our business. The businessman walked over to his Mercedes and took a briefcase from the back seat. He returned and placed it on the hood of the Kenworth. I have a proposal, Dominguez said, opening the briefcase and taking out several documents. My company operates 32 heavy-duty vehicles. I currently use 3 different repair shops for maintenance, and none of them completely satisfy me. They're more interested in getting paid than doing the job right. Roberto felt his heart race. This was the moment he had been waiting for. I need a shop that is my partner, not just my supplier, Dominguez continued. A place where I can trust that my vehicles will receive honest and competent care. Today I saw both of those qualities here. He held one of the documents out to Roberto. This is a 1-year renewable maintenance contract. It includes scheduled service for my entire fleet, emergency repairs with a response time of less than 4 hours, and 24-hour availability. The total value of the contract is 2,200,000 pesos per year. Roberto took the document with trembling hands. The figure represented more than the shop had billed in the last 2 years combined. There is one condition, Dominguez added, looking directly at Miguel. You will be the lead mechanic assigned to my fleet. I want you to personally supervise every vehicle that leaves this shop with my name on it. Miguel looked at Roberto, who nodded vigorously. I accept, Miguel said, but with one condition of my own. Any safety issue you identify must be repaired regardless of the time required. I will not certify any vehicle as safe if it is not. Dominguez extended his hand. That's exactly what I want to hear. We have a deal. As the two men shook hands, Roberto felt years of worry and stress melt away. Marcos, Javier, and Ernesto smiled openly, aware that the future of the workshop was secure. But more than that, they knew they had just witnessed something special. The moment when integrity and talent received the reward they deserved. 3 months later, the Hernandez auto repair shop had undergone a complete transformation. The bays, which had previously been half empty, now constantly housed 3 or 4 vehicles from the Dominguez Transportes fleet. The place had been painted, new equipment had been installed, and the exterior sign gleamed proudly under the Guadalajara sun. Roberto was in his office, now renovated with new furniture and air conditioning that actually worked, reviewing the financial reports with a smile he couldn't hide. For the first time in 2 years, all the numbers were positive. Not only had he paid off all his accumulated debts, but he had also been able to hire 2 additional mechanics and increase the salaries of his entire team. A soft knock on the door brought him out of his thoughts. Miguel entered, carrying a folder with maintenance reports. The last 5 trucks in the fleet are scheduled for service next week, Miguel reported, placing the folder on the desk. I also got a call from Transportes Miranda. They want to know if we can take care of the maintenance of their fleet. There are 22 vehicles. Roberto laughed in disbelief. 3 months ago, we were on the verge of closing, and now we're turning down work because we don't have enough capacity. It's surreal. It's not luck, Miguel said, sitting down across from Roberto. It's the result of doing things right. Dominguez's drivers talk. When a truck leaves here, it runs perfectly. When a driver has a problem on the road and calls our emergency line, we respond. In this industry, that kind of reliability spreads fast. Roberto nodded, watching the man who had transformed not only his business, but the entire culture of the shop. Miguel had implemented tracking systems, ongoing training for all mechanics, and quality standards that rivaled the most professional shops in the city. Carmen wants you to come over for dinner this Friday, Roberto said. She insists it's not a request, it's an order. She says she needs to personally thank the man who saved her husband's job. Miguel smiled warmly. It would be my pleasure. Can I bring anything? Just your appetite. My wife cooks as if she were feeding an army. Marcos appeared at the door, interrupting the conversation. Miguel, the new mechanic, has questions about the Freightliner's injection system in Bay 3. Can you take a look at it? I'll go now, Miguel replied, standing up. Before leaving, he turned to Roberto. By the way, remember you mentioned wanting to expand the workshop? Yes, but I was thinking of doing it in a couple of years when we had more capital accumulated. I've been crunching the numbers. Miguel took a folded piece of paper out of his pocket. If we accept the Miranda transport contract and maintain our current level of efficiency, we could finance the expansion in 6 months. There's a vacant lot next to the workshop that's for sale. We could add 3 more bays and a specialized area for electronic diagnostics. Roberto took the paper and studied Miguel's meticulous calculations. It all made sense. The numbers were conservative but optimistic. When did you do all this? Roberto asked, impressed. I couldn't sleep last night. I was excited thinking about the possibilities, Miguel admitted. Roberto, you gave me a chance when no one else did. I want to help you build something great here. Not just a successful workshop, but a place where mechanics are valued and honest work is rewarded. Roberto felt a lump in his throat, stood up, and hugged Miguel. We're already building that, son. Every day. That afternoon, as the sun began to set over Guadalajara, painting the sky orange and pink, Miguel was under a truck in the main bay, teaching the new mechanic the nuances of the air brake system. Around him, the shop buzzed with productive activity. Tools clanged, engines roared, and technical conversations filled the air. Javier, who had been the youngest and least experienced member of the team, was now confidently supervising a complex repair. Ernesto, the older mechanic who once thought his best days were behind him, had learned new techniques and was working with the enthusiasm of someone 20 years younger. Marcos, initially skeptical of Miguel, had become his most trusted right-hand man. Roberto watched everything from his office, a cup of coffee in his hand. His phone vibrated with a message from Carmen. "How's your day going, love?" He replied with a photo of the workshop in full swing and a simple message, better than ever. In the main bay, Miguel emerged from under the truck, his hands stained with grease, but his expression satisfied. "Do you understand how the system works now?" he asked the new mechanic. "I think so. It's more complex than I thought, but it makes sense." "Good. Complexity is not the enemy." "Ignorance is," said Miguel, wiping his hands. "Never be afraid to ask if you don't understand something. In this workshop, admitting what you don't know is the first step to learning." The young mechanic nodded gratefully. Miguel recognized in his eyes the same uncertainty he had felt a year ago, when his career seemed over and his future was uncertain. But now, thanks to a man who had seen beyond appearances and rumors, Miguel had not only a job, but a purpose. Tonight, after the last vehicle left the workshop and the lights were turned off one by one, Miguel was the last to leave. He stood at the entrance, looking inside the place that had become more than just a job. It was his redemption, his second chance, his professional home. He got on his motorcycle, which now worked perfectly thanks to the maintenance Javier had done as a gift of gratitude. As he drove to his apartment through the brightly lit streets of Guadalajara, Miguel thought about the strange turn his life had taken a year ago. He had been fired for doing the right thing and had spent months struggling, surviving on odd jobs, questioning whether his decision to maintain his integrity had been worth it. There were dark nights when he considered compromising his principles just to regain stability, but he didn't. And now, thanks to that decision in a desperate workshop in need of urgent help, Miguel had found something he thought he had lost forever, a place where he belonged, people who valued him, and confirmation that doing the right thing eventually pays off. The next day, when Miguel arrived at the workshop at 7 a.m., he found Roberto already working in the office. On the desk was a new document, the minority partnership agreement offering Miguel a 5% stake in the workshop. "I can't accept this," Miguel said in surprise. "Of course you can," Roberto replied firmly. "You're not just here as an employee. You're part of what we're building. You deserve to share in the success you helped create." Miguel looked at the document, then at Roberto, and finally at the workshop that stretched beyond the office. A place that had been on the verge of collapse 3 months ago was now full of life, purpose, and future. He signed the document. Outside, the Guadalajara sun began another day shining on a mechanic's shop that had learned that true strength comes not from never falling, but from getting up when you fall, and that sometimes broken people are the ones who know best how to fix things. The Hernandez Auto Repair Shop was ready to face the future with a team united by something more valuable than technical skill: mutual respect, shared integrity, and the understanding that real success is measured not only in financial gains, but in transformed lives and upheld principles. And it all started because one desperate man decided to give another desperate man a chance at a time when both needed it most.